This podcast is proudly sponsored by Los Arango Tequila. They are making sure you and I get to keep making episodes throughout the summer.
And that was very nice of them, and then they brought us down, and I hope that our listeners have looked back at our
mini-series, our first
three-part mini-series and road trip to Mexico, where we learned all about Los Arango.
And you can grab these bottles at the LCBO. It is very reasonably priced.
And the LCBO is now open.
It is now open.
It's now open.
Boy, I hope they haven't regretted it yet.
What, the tequila or the strike?
The sponsorship.
No, they don't. They don't.
You're listening to Two Guys Talking Wine with Michael Pincus and Andre Prue.
Hello, Michael.
Andre, how are you? We're in the backyard again.
Yeah. You know what the funny thing is, though? We were supposed to record this episode instead of last week's Pinot Extravaganza.
We did. We were supposed to, and we were supposed to have a guest.
Yes.
And that changed.
Yes.
Very quickly.
Well, you know what? Let me just say, I've been thinking about this. We get approached by a lot of people who've been listening to this podcast for a long time. This is one of the only podcasts where all you need to do to get on the podcast is be a listener and have a really good reason to come on the podcast.
Right. Yeah. And you have to have maybe your own winery.
Your own winery. Or you maybe need to work for an agency.
Maybe work for an agency.
Or
both.
Or be a sommelier. We've got the hat trick of qualifications to be a great guest on this podcast. We are joined by...
Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Joel Wilcox. Fourth Wall Wines, Woodman Wines and Spirits, also a sommelier to round out Andre's trifecta.
There you go. Perfect.
It's the triptych trick. Does that work?
I think so.
Something of that nature.
That doesn't work. We'll edit that out.
So,
get it in post.
We won't.
So right from the get-go, we told Joel we're going to do a podcast with him about a little Stump the Chump, but that's not this one. This one we're going to talk to him about Fourth Wall Wines.
Well, and a bunch of stuff. I mean,
and a bunch of stuff. Correct.
We got a lot of really great feedback about our episode with Stephen K at Fairmont, and I think it's interesting to get into the minds of a somm about why we're seeing a lack of representation in Ontario, and I think you're going to offer a unique perspective because you're dealing with licensees, right?
Yep.
You're also dealing with licensees for your agency and for your own brand.
Yep.
And you used to work the floor at some really great restaurants.
Yeah. So back in the pre-children days of 2011-ish thereabouts, I was at Canoe Restaurant and I worked the program with Will Preedom at the time, and we were in that fortunate position of being a real icon flagship restaurant that had a specialization for Canadian food, for Canadian wine, and we really made an effort to seek out the best of the best in all forms. And so we had that luxury, but that was my first exposure to the general Toronto climate of what does a wine program look like at a large organization? What do the folks with the dollars to spend money at these high-end restaurants want to purchase? And so that was really instructive to, just to sort of see where we sit as a wine producing area against a lot of these international counterparts.
Well, this might be a good place to just hop into that, though. 2011, what did the landscape look back then? And just so we can seg into tasting some wines quickly, is that what inspired you to start Fourth Wall?
Yeah, that actually was part of the impetus. So flashback to 2011, or even like 2000, and let's roll it back even to like the early 2000s. Okay, so early.
We're in the Wayback Machine now.
Oh yeah, we've got the hot tub time machine. It's all dialed up. I've actually never seen the film. Is that appropriate? That reference?
Yeah, it's a terrible movie.
Is it? Okay,
but it's also kind of good. But it's also really bad. But also kind of good, if you get what I mean. One of those movies.
Yeah. Well, that was what the Ontario wine industry was like back in 2011. Oh, look at the segue. Look at the segue.
That's great.
Yeah. No, but the way I kind of I like to talk to people about it in terms of, now, Michael, you've been around for a long time assessing Ontario wine. And when did you start? You can recall?
I'm over 20 years now, so we're 24. So, 2004 probably is my first. 2004, 2003,
And
then before that, I was drinking Ontario wine. My first, what the wine that I fell kind of in love with that got me into Ontario wine was a Chateau de Charme, 1998. They said black label. I always saw it as blue. But it was the St. David's Bench Cab Merlot. That's the one that I absolutely fell in love with. You remember the old label with the gold trim? It was
I gave that a label a shout out over the past week. I still hope that Chateau de Charme brings that back. It would have such a great vintage feel. I think Somms in Toronto would lose their minds if they saw these block colors with gold text looking very classic, with a good wine in the bottle to boot.
Yeah, it's and those are real standout labels, and goes back to a time, with a lot of those old, really structured, built up, sort of classic feels, and those wines, I think, are we've kind of moved away from those stylistically, but if you're looking back to those days, people were trying to build bigger reds where possible. Ice wine was at the tail end of the initial boom. Like I think it was 2002 when the boom kind of hit, and then we started to decline. And that's also those rocky years of 2003 and 2005 with the cold snaps and the imports before fans were really a thing. So this is where I sound like Grandpa Simpson, I think, right?
I was in university in Saskatchewan in 2003 and 2005, and I was still drinking Jose Cuervo. The bad experiences that we referred to in our Los Orango episodes. And the wines I would have been drinking at the time, though, which is pertinent, was Wolf Blass. That was what got me into wine.
Which was the style at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here in Ontario, too. Remember, Wolf Blass yellow label was what was key. And then yellow seemed to be a big thing because then Yellow Tail came along, which was also the bigger seller. And then I think Fusion took over from Yellowtail. And then the steady downward spiral started from there.
And I think that's part of the reason I bring it up, is because we have a very unusual position. I shouldn't say that. Very unusual. This happens all over the world, I suppose, in other forms. But when you talk about style in Ontario, and you go back to before I was born, what did we have? We had Baby Duck. We had a lot of hybrids. The vinifera.
Paula. You were black or blue.
Yeah.
Right. You were blue. Blue Nun or Black Tower. That's what the.
Yeah. Those are your options. Your Matus.
Yeah, Matus is big.
And so the culture of Ontario wine was really not. It was limited to a lot of imports, a lot of the bigger brands, sweeter stuff, and this is also this is not unique. America went through the same kind of rhythms too, and so Ontario, in the in the 70s and 80s and developing, where did we find our voice? Where were the grapes that really stood out? And I remember there was an old Chris Waters column where he talks about Riesling being at Hillebrand being one of those first like light bulb moment wines. Say, hey, we can do this. This is good, and of course, but point is, getting out of post 2000, once Covey came along and we started to see some more homegrown winemakers, there was, in conjunction with that, a bigger focus on what's made where and why. And I think that I remember going through like a SOM certification around, what was it, I guess 06, 07, and learning about what people were drinking, why were they drinking it, but the overall culture, what people were buying in the LCBO and in Ontario, besides beer, was what you're saying. It was the trends of modern wines. It was big fruit, big oak, and so naturally, as you get more and more people saying, hey, Ontario makes really good wines, hey, we make really great wines here, there, everywhere, but they don't taste like the stuff you're used to buying.
Correct. I still get that to these days.
Yep.
Like I get that to these days on wine tours where people are like, oh, I really love California Cab. And I'm like, you ain't getting that here.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so understanding your identity as a region is something that you don't get to just decide entirely. I mean, think of everywhere in Europe, and of course now a lot of New World countries making wines that they've come to identify as their own. Like, you can't trip over New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc with. We can't trip over anything related to New Zealand without saying Sauvignon Blanc and thinking that. And so Ontario, we've done a really good job, I think, of identifying those grapes that are most successful. And not to bury the lead, Andre, but I think the ADX Wine Company is doing a fine job with identifying Chardonnay and its successes.
But on the other hand, we're still known for ice wine in a
In a
large
global
part.
context, for sure.
Like, it's amazing how many Americans get on to the tour and they're like, "Oh, I can't wait to taste ice wine." And I'm like, "Well, we make other things."
I know
And-
we're sort of at a chicken and egg situation. Like, you and I have rehashed this argument over and over again. Is like, so what do we need to do to change minds? Do we need to focus on an export market to appease that Toronto crowd where nothing in Toronto is cool unless it's popular somewhere else? And maybe you can speak to that.
But if
as
that-
soon as I wrap the point, or do we want to find a way to try to convince the locals to drink the wine? Because that's the thing is, they say when you visit the Okanagan, it's something like 90% of the wine doesn't leave the valley because the locals are drinking it.
But by your theory,
I'm not making a theory. I just said it's a chicken and egg question.
That Toronto won't drink anything until it's popular elsewhere. Ice wine should be everywhere in Toronto.
But I don't think ice wine has ever really been popular anywhere.
Sure, it is. Asia made it very, very popular. It's amazing how many
But what influence?
Asian tour buses come into Toronto and end up in Niagara with.
But China doesn't have the same influence on Western culture that European or American culture has on Canada. Like, if Charlize Theron had picked up a bottle of ice wine and started promoting it, I think we'd be having a very different conversation right now. But it got popular in China, not just Asia, like China in particular.
Yeah, China in particular.
I think that the sweet wine market overall globally has been having some challenges.
Absolutely.
And so,
ports,
yeah.
sherries, things like that. I have them in my cellar. You don't drink them very often, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate part. I got some great ports, but they just languish in the cellar because you know.
All right. Well, when you were working at Canoe in 2011, like let's get to the fun part of the conversation. Is
Well, let's hold on before we do that. There's a brown liquid in a glass in front of us. We should at least start
okay.
off
Let's do that. Let's do that.
by every so often we have to break it up with a liquid of some sort, or else we're going to be rushing through everything at the end. So,
Yes.
This is your very own Stump the Chump that you pulled out of the cellar, and it's not, I think, the Riesling that you took a picture of and said, "Hey, I think this should be interesting," because this one's more reddish.
I think you figured out that half of the equation. So yeah, we have.
Wait, can I taste this? Are there any rules to this?
No, it's a Stump the Chump moment.
It smells better than most of the stuff you pour for me
Absolutely not.
on Stump the Chump.
Oh,
Sorry, let me clear that. Michael generally pours very nice wines for me, just not during Stump the Chump. Those are genuinely as awful as I make them sound.
this has got that kind of Pinot Noir kind of note to it that we had last week. Of the worst ones. I do not like the smell of this wine.
There's not much going on great on the palate. It feels like a lot of oak.
I'm not picking up anything.
The nose is really mushroom. When you say Pinot, it kind of takes my head to mushroom country.
Yeah, I'm not
Like canned mushrooms, fresh canned mushroom. Not fresh canned mushroom. That's a contradiction.
freshly
A
canned
can
mushrooms.
of mushrooms freshly opened.
or a bag of mushrooms, perhaps also freshly opened.
Yeah, I'm not digging this in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
But I'm going to go Pinot Noir.
I'm going to guess Pinot as well.
it is Pinot Noir.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
I'm going to say it's Ontario.
Yeah,
Um,
we're doing a great job advertising for the industry right now.
yeah.
I'm guessing this is 20 years old. I'm guessing this is in 04, 05.
It's
in
not
around there.
04, 05. I know I teased you with a photo of something from that period, but
I think it's younger than that. I don't even think it's a hot vintage.
No, the acids are high on it.
I'm going to go 13.
Oh.
I think it's older than 13.
It is older than 13. It is older than 2013. It's and it is a Pinot. What I can tell you about here's what I to my memory, and I'm I am not in charge of this wine, but I would say that this was one that I really loved back on release. I think that the florals are still there. I think that there is some high tone, lifted quality to it that, to me, it goes into this violet with, it's almost like a braised mushroom. Like if you start to cook up some shiitakes or some chanterelles, and you get a little bit of this, like, I'm not going to say a butter because it's not.
No, it's like the mushroom water when it starts to come out.
Yeah, because you're precipitating these aromas up there. But it's the fruit that's there. If there was a bit of cherry, it's dried out now, and that cranberry is tart. But I really like the acid and the freshness that I still get out of it. There is some wood, but I don't think there's a ton of it in its production.
The wood went away with the second sip.
Yeah. So to me, do you want to see the bottle? Or
the high acid would maybe say 09?
It is 09.
Ah, there we go.
Oh,
yeah.
So we split the difference.
Yep. And this is a wine that the vines, to my memory, have been ripped up, so you can't make it anymore. Do you want to? Shall I?
Let's see.
All right.
Just show it to the audience.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a Lely.
It's a Lely Brickyard Pinot.
Oh, this isn't
the
even
Brickyard.
what was it, the lot 48 that they used to do?
No, this was and I remember back in those days when Derek was making this, it had this elegance about it that
Brickyard was always lovely.
Yeah, and a cool vintage that I think it's still got some life left to it. It's still got some spunk. I have 2 bottles of this at home still, so I thought might as well. If it's not corked, then
it's not corked.
Hell,
for
we
sure.
do. Yeah,
the high acid screams 09. Then now that you had pointed it out a little bit more there.
So what made you choose to bring this one today?
Well, I was just trying to ride the coattails of the last episode that I missed out on with the 20 Pinots.
Did you? So here's another segue back. Did you serve this at Canoe when you were working the floor? Because this would have just hit the market when you were working there in 2011.
It was sold out by the time that we poured a lot of Lely stuff. I remember their Muscat was really fun to do with tasting menus. There's Weigelt at the time. Was a fun little play too. Syrah, of course, and
Syrahs were always very good.
Yeah, we always.
Cab Francs were always good too, as well. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Cab Sauves in hot years, one of the only people that could kill it every year. Yep. Well, kill it every hot year.
So
yeah.
All right. So Andre was about to ask a question before I got us into at least one of the wines. I'm looking forward.
I sort of segued
to
back
Joel's
to it.
wines too.
So what were people drinking back then, and what was the state of the industry? And like, you've obviously been a great ambassador for Ontario wine. Did you try to load the list up, and was there pushback? Like, paint the picture for us.
We didn't have to overdo it. I think that if anything, there was perhaps maybe a little overrepresented for Chardonnay at the time, but it's so tough when there are so many great Chardonnays out there, and they were all in that same price band of $25 to $35. Like, that was sort of the zone. We tried to have everything. What I found was there are ways to approach tables. There are guests who know exactly what they want. You can have maybe 80% of your tables in a night where the buyer, the customer has looked at the list, or they just know a handful of brands that they feel comfortable with, and those wines sell themselves. Back in those days, there was every night there was a bottle of Decoy Cab in the bin at the end of the evening. Almost every night, a Langmeil Shiraz or Langmeil Shiraz in the bin at the end of the night. It was when people wanted to drink Ontario. We did a pretty good job, I thought, of making sure the servers were well trained to know, the great producers. We only had wonderful bottles on the list, so you could feel assured that you were getting the best of what you could. But what guests who wanted Ontario were comfortable with were almost always the Pinots, the Gamets. A bit of a handstall with the Gamets, but the thought process being, no matter what you're eating, you're going to be fine. If it's fish, if it's red meat, the Pinot pretty much cut across that. Riesling to an extent, but it was oftentimes by the glass or with tasting menus. And actually, the tasting menu was one of the fun parts. Like, you could feel pretty liberal about what you wanted to pair. And I remember we brought in at one point a L'Acadie Blanc for the one that Steve Byfield was making up at Coffin Ridge at the time. It was the first L'Acadie Blanc that I remember being planted in Ontario, or at least sold commercially. We brought that in at the time, and but there was always a good score of, like, say 5 to 10 Rieslings, probably about 15 Chards. Any of the other varieties you would look at maybe having, again, 8 to 10 examples. Tried to keep the favorites. Obviously, some moved faster than others. I remember there was an 03 CSV Chard on the list forever that had been there. And honestly, one of my favorite wines, really piercing acid, a lovely, lovely bottle. But those were hand sells to when people really wanted to kind of tour the minutia of the program, and I would probably get 1 or 2 customers a night who were looking to be a tourist, but it wasn't everybody, and certainly they got the attention because
So when did you get out of the restaurant?
It was about it was just before my daughter was born, so it was around late 2014.
When you've spun a very positive light, and you're talking about Ontario wine in a positive light. What percentage of the wine that you were selling, obviously ballpark, we're not going to hold you to exact statistics, how much of the wine were you selling in between 2011 and 2014 was Canadian at the end of the night?
Well, I would probably say that if it were, without any direction, I would probably say about 10 to 20%. If myself or another manager were working the wine program on the floor and we really pushed it, maybe 25, 33%. There were some nights where we just killed it, and it was like one after another, and I feel really good about it. But there's only so much leg room or wiggle room you can have. Mostly on Friday nights was when most of the people from out of town came in for sort of the tourist dinner. But Monday to Thursday rather. It was a lot of locals and a lot of regulars, and their picks were mostly international, and that was just based on habit. I shouldn't say they weren't willing to try, and we're always loved having the conversations. The truth is, there's a wonderful world of wine out there, and if you want to have a quote unquote world class program, you have to have the best of everything available, right? So yeah,
very diplomatic. And I'd be curious what the percentage of Canadian wine being sold now is, if it's the same, if it's more, if it's less, if habits have changed. Because I think all 4 of us can agree on the table that even since 2011, the quality of wine across the board in Ontario is better and more consistent than it was back then.
I would think it's probably around the same. I'd be surprised if it wasn't. But 20 to maybe 30%, unless that's what all you had on your list, because we're talking about Toronto. Right, and there's still the bias of Ontario does not make great wine in that city.
Okay, well, we've said that a lot of times. Shall we carry on?
Yeah. So that's why I didn't want to have to say it again, but
and yet you did.
It deserved saying. So, Joel, how many wines did you bring with you? Let me find that out first.
Yeah, because we should make sure we keep this moving along. Because we've already been yakking for 25 minutes.
So there are 7 wines in the bag.
Okay, so let's pour one now. Let's talk a little bit about Fourth Wall, and then we'll maybe find out. Let's just talk Fourth Wall.
Well, in 2014, did you start Fourth Wall in 2014?
No, not exactly. I when I was at Canoe, this idea I'd had since back in like 2007 or so. The idea of having a small little collection of wines and finding a way to bring them to life and bring them into the world. When I was at Canoe, I had a number of conversations with a few different wineries about doing small batch production, and maybe just to sort of circle back on what it is was a means of explaining. So, Fourth Wall Wines is sort of some people would call it a virtual winery, but I don't really look at it that way. I think of it as a project of winemaking that's it's done in conjunction with different wineries, and I want to make sure that when a wine comes into being,
you're more of a negociant than
something like that.
A winemaker, and you're you're more involved with the wine. Like, you're not just buying loose bottles and slapping your label on it.
Yeah.
You're involved in the production in some way, shape, or
So
form.
you buy the grapes and you...
Well, everything's different with everybody,
Okay,
but the idea is that you got you've got wine. We want to sell it. We want to make it in a certain way. We want to show. You want to just condition your glass and spit that or rinse that guy out there. The way I look at it is, you've got an industry here, and we make a lot of great wine. And I think a lot of really wonderful people are making amazing wines. Here, let's condition that one too. Just kind of dump that one there. And me, being somebody sort of on the outside, I mean, I'm from Niagara and I grew up there and I've worked in the business. I mean, my first job was with Riverview Cellars, and they're one of the wineries that's participating with this. Here, let me pour you guys up here now. Or did you already? Oh, you're very efficient. Thank you.
We've done this before.
Yeah, excellent.
Just a few times.
I do love how hot it is outside. Like, and we're recording this in my backyard on July 29th, and all the glasses like immediately are just covered with
condensation.
steam and condensation. Yeah.
So the first wine obviously is a Riesling. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And the year of this one?
This is 2019, so this has been long sold out. Sorry, just to finish the thought before. So a lot of amazing people making a lot of amazing wine. And I, as a somm who had a chance to taste a million things before, I loved having conversations with the winemakers. And we would have a chance to, debate this grape or that grape, this site or that site, this year or that year. And I always wanted to sort of be involved in the process. And so when the initial talks that I had years ago with a few different wineries about making some small batches of wines, the issue was always, how do you make them? How do you sell them? And so that's why I didn't really get to launch the project until after getting out of the restaurant business, because I needed to have a bigger network to distribute them. Now, this is a Riesling that was made at Ravine Vineyard. So this is one of the first 4 wines that was made. It's, like I say, it's long sold out. And this one was it was kind of cool. We were in the back at the time. Marty Werner was there. Now Marty's doing his own
A
few
own things.
A few things. Yeah, Marty's wonderful. He's a great fella. And Lydia had just taken over as a full-time winemaker. And so there was this punch-in of Riesling in the back. It was a Mercury punch-in, and I love that barrel. I mean, I don't look for wines to have, huge influence from wood, but when you have something kind of fun and kicking around, I thought, this is, neat little wine to try. So anyways, stunned by the acid, loved the freshness, loved the texture, and I'm a fan of drier Rieslings. Again, this is not to sort of belabor the point on it, but I thought, we see at the time there had been a lot of Rieslings from Ontario that were, around 10 grams residual sugar, maybe 15. Alcohol could sit a little bit. They go all over the place, right? But this one here, just under 11% alcohol, quite dry though, really searing acid, and yet mellowing out now.
19 was that year for acid. It seems the nines seem to be there.
Yeah.
09 was very good for acid. 19 was very good for acid. I really like this wine. The petrol is just starting to slowly creep its way in on the nose, and that's in my opinion that's where Riesling should be at about the 5-year mark. It's just slowly starting to creep its way in. In a hot year they'll be there in year 2. This is quite lovely and right there. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and
you said long sold out.
Yeah.
So,
Which vineyard is this from? I see it's 4 Mile Creek.
Yeah, this was.
And you said who made it?
This is the Franklin Vineyard, so it's sort of relatively near to where St. David's Bench is, but in the flatland part. So
got it. I think we should move on to wine number 2. I know you want to continue on with that Riesling, but
well, you know what? I'm going to take another sip of this Riesling before we move on. I think we jumped ahead to you starting Fourth Wall because you worked at an agency for a few years before we got there. When you went from being a sommelier to a floor sommelier to working for an agency, was there anything that you noticed about how other somms were talking about Ontario wine, or when you were going into restaurants to do the sales calls? Like, what was it? What was it like making that shift? And did it shift any of your opinions, or did anything surprise you when you made that shift and started seeing what other people were doing?
Well, the one thing that's important to consider is that we didn't have any Ontario wine at the agency that we're doing for licensees. So my perspective was largely international, but I never, to be honest, it's not like there was a huge demand and call out for Ontario. And I always, I can, in my own ways, always suggest, hey, listen, if you're going down to Niagara, you want to be connected with any wineries. I still got a lot of friends down there, happy to, to put it together for you. And some folks would, take me up on that. But that was sort of the extent of the advocacy. And really, even today, like, if I go into a restaurant, 9 times out of 10, the demand for anything is international. It's that kind of acceptance of all wine brands out of Ontario is still challenging. Not to say that there aren't a lot of great places that do, and I think it's not just these wines, but a lot of other brands that are out there that are sort of knocking on doors, and I don't need to get into the big long list of them all, but I'm sure you've seen them, as there are some really well established houses that are out, but always in small amounts. Like, it's the big way to look at wine lists in Toronto or anywhere really. It's by the glass or it's by the bottle. So what your by the glass rotation will give you is presence like right up front. The ability of getting it in your glass fast, because so many people will just opt for a glass these days. Now, if you are building a list, here, let me pour another wine in your glass,
yes,
and then we'll get into the...
There's a rosé kind of feel to it.
Bricolage is the name of the wine.
Yeah, Bricolage.
I'm not just randomly saying French words.
Yeah. This is the first rosé that we made. We made this at Riverview.
It is dark. It looks like you may have stolen this from Canada Blood Services.
I just wanted to have something that was like a Cerasuolo.
It's a 2022.
Yeah.
Love Cerasuolo, by the way.
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
Yeah. So looking at by the glass versus by the bottle, if you are building a program, there are lots of different ways to build it. You can build it in a way where you've got a functional list for sort of the conventional program. So you probably have a Pinot Grigio, you probably have a Chardonnay, you probably have a Cabernet, maybe you have a Pinot, maybe you have something kind of cool and deeper and bigger. You might have a Merlot, but you have a sort of straightforward way to build your list, and a ton of Pinot Grigio. The expectation of a guest who's buying a glass of Pinot Grigio is they're probably going to spend a limited amount of money. Maybe it's $11 a glass, $12 a glass, $13 a glass, which means your cost has to be in that range too. Or if you're getting more aggressive, as close to $9 or $10 as you can get. And so there's a sea of inexpensive Pinot Grigio coming from Italy, and it doesn't have to be like an actual named region. It could be a generic area, and that could be a wine that you sort of need and sort of expect to buy as a buyer. A California Chardonnay is also one of those styles that maybe you kind of go off the beaten path. You don't buy a Cali Chard. Ontario has an opportunity for some Chardonnay, sometimes Pinot Gris, maybe Riesling, but then the Riesling is one of those wines that a person may decide, I don't need a sweet wine on my list. I'm just going to forget about Riesling altogether. The reds, again, a world of red that's out there. So what are your options? Not often cabs from Canada, because the cost, again, it's too high, and the expectation is that it's that Paso Robles style, it's that Cali style, big fruit, jammy, bit of structure. Unless you're and that's in a conventional wine list. If you're in a more esoteric wine list, if you're in a wine bar, then the game changes altogether, and you may have a philosophy of organic, biodynamic, natural, and all those little caveats that all of a sudden maybe your conventional Ontario wines don't fit into, and there are so few options really that, I mean, in Ontario there are probably, I can think of 5 off the top of my head that are in that sort of natural camp. But beyond that, there's sort of the perception that there are, regular wines, there are normal wines, and they're not cool enough to be part of that world. And I think that there's no one answer, because there are so many programs and there's so many different views of how to build a list. If the person who's working the program has gone through schooling, like wine programs, so either the Court of Master Sommeliers, CAPS, ISG, Somm Factory, anything like that, if they've gone through some programming, then they've got a great foundation by which to build. But does that person have the experience to build a program, and do they grow with the rhythms that their business entails? And then the other factor that we could say is, how long will the person be in that position for? Because the turnover in these jobs can be high.
Yeah.
And so you may have a meeting, and then 6 months later that person's not there.
Yeah.
And so what you've tasted and that experience may translate over to the next venture, or it may not.
Getting even more complicated when you talk about cost is when you're talking about these large brands being able to come in. Often these are wineries with deep pockets who can offer free umbrellas or free coasters or things that restaurants don't have to buy. So not only are you competing, mano a mano with these wineries in terms of quality, you now have to compete with the toys as well.
So bricolage.
Bricolage.
Yes. So a Cherasuelo knockoff made from...
So this is, I call it a field blend assembled in tank.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. No. In 2022, there was a year where a lot of places got rocked, and very limited crops, in different spots across the board. So this was in alphabetical order: Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, Gewürztraminer, Merlot, and Riesling.
I don't get the Gewürztraminer at all, which is surprising, because usually
it's a small percentage.
Gewürztraminer comes, screaming out of the glass even when you have small percentages, but you seem to have hidden it quite well in the rest of them. There's some nice tannins on the palate, which is typical of Cherasuelo.
Would this pass as a Cherasuelo knockoff there, Mr. Pink?
You know what? It's pretty close, because the cherry is right there, and there's a tannin element to it, which is typical of that Abruzzo style of rosé, because it is a red wine that they've just left on skins for a limited amount of time, as rosé is. But they don't technically call it rosé. They think of it more of as a very light red. Like, think of it as their Gamay, or almost like a Gamay Nouveau to them. But they do manage to get a little tannin in there, and I like this. It's got that quality to it.
Well, I appreciate you including it in your rosé report last year as well. So yeah, thank you.
So why make a rosé in this style? This is so counter to what most of the market's drinking for rosé.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Why have the same of everything else? I want to have, if there's a rosé that I put out there, let it be a rosé that you can have at any point of the year, that it feels deep enough and dense enough to still stand up to the fall and winter, to make it a rosé for all seasons. But also, just to bring it back, what Michael said was, I know it's in jest, but a Cherasuelo knockoff, the fact that we would think of ourselves in a knockoff fashion is not really helpful to the cause of Ontario wines. It was sort of, I look at these as, there's inspiration.
You got to get out of my head, Joel. I was actually thinking the exact same thing, but I didn't want to throw Michael under the bus.
The only reason that I said that is because you had mentioned it yourself, right?
Yes, and
had you not said anything, I would have just gone with the description of the wine itself and not even brought up
the inspiration. Version. Yeah, the inspiration.
But
and I
called it a knockoff.
Yeah,
as you said, in jest.
Yeah,
but but the problem, here's the thing, though, we do not see a lot of Cherasuelo in Ontario. I brought one back from Abruzzo from I can't remember the name of the winery off the top of my head, but and I brought it over to a friend's house for dinner, And they were like, "How do I get this?" And I go, "You can't. It's hard to get that kind of wine here." Now I know that, theoretically, you kind of can.
And I think that it's fun to try. It's fun to try new things. I think that it's funny. The 22s had such bright fruit, and they were so delicious and juicy and accessible right off the hop that we kind of we kind of got lost in the madness of 20. Everything. 20 is the best vintage ever, and 21. Oh no, it's the rainiest vintage ever. And so 22, if you had wine, how much of it are you getting? And I think that we did a nice batch of this. We didn't do it again in 23. Looking at options for 24, but really happy with how fresh it is, how bright it is, and how it's still holding up today. And I've already poured the next wine for you guys here. If you,
It's already in my glass.
Yeah, we're fast.
So this is I'm going to assume it's an orange wine of some sort.
It doesn't smell orange, but it is orange. Oh yeah, it's really orange.
Yeah, it's like almost orange crush territory.
Just so we're not just doing tasting notes.
Yeah.
Why'd you start Fourth Wall Wines? Let's get to talking about that while we sip on this wine.
Well, it's kind of like the old Groucho Marx joke. I wouldn't want to be part of a club that would have someone like me as a member. I think that maybe not that. I just like that joke, I suppose. There's a scene in High Fidelity when John Cusack's character wants to create a record label, and the conversation with his I forget if it was his wife or his girlfriend at the time was that you've been a critic for a long time. Don't you want to put something else out to the world? Why don't you want to add to the market? And I think that's sort of where it's all coming from. I haven't been a critic necessarily, but I've been at it for a long time. I was 18 really when I was starting to get into the wine business, and so I'm 40 now, and I feel like if you ever have an opportunity to contribute to the culture and to the overall scene, this is the chance, right? This is the time. Andrew, you've got a smile on your face, like something good is happening in the glass.
It's
you're feeling the same way.
No, I think it's the same reason I started the ADX Wine Company. It's a quote I learned from the guys at Stala Building Solutions in Hamilton that I hadn't really thought about. As they like to say, the great rapper DMX once said, "Talk is cheap, motherfucker." And it's one thing to be a critic with a weekly radio spot, and you and I had been doing the podcast together, and it's just like, we're essentially potentially causing damage to some people's livelihood if we say their product's not good. So I needed to see how hard it was. And I mean, here we are 8 years into ADX, and the number one thing I'm saying is it is way harder to make money in this wine business than I think anyone could ever realize, to the point where it's borderline unsustainable. I haven't packed it in yet, but it's easier to make money with flour, butter, and yeast than it is with grapes and yeast.
This is the dual segue where, number one, we shout out to Chaton in the Hamilton Market.
Chaton in the Hamilton Farmers Market, the bakery that my wife and I opened earlier this year. So the wine in the glass, is it an orange wine?
Well,
is it made with an amphora in Georgia? Did you dance around it, burning incense and chanting? I don't know. I'm trying to think of all the other stereotypes. Throw some at me about.
I don't want to say anything about this one.
No, it's not bad.
It's not your style, and that's okay.
It's not my style, and I wouldn't. I'm willing to taste these things, and it's just one of those things where I do not I would not finish a glass of that.
Yeah, and I totally understand that. And to me, like the style of Pinot Gris, we've made Pinot Gris in 2019, 2020, and then this one in 22. But the 19 and the 20 were conventional, 5 to 15% barrel aging. Yep. This 22 is legally a white wine. Because it only had 5 days skin contact, and to qualify for skin fermented wine under VQA, you have to have 10.
Yeah.
Now we bottled it in a clear bottle so that you can see an obvious orange color, but technically it's a white, and that's how it goes, right? But in making one, because I had a lot of request and demand for that style of wine, it maybe is the first thing that I would necessarily reach for, but I knew that the Pinot Gris can show some really great aromatics. These are, awesome, 20-year-old vines, and there can be some weight and density that play along with it well. So I think
you've been in the industry a long time. You know there's a market for that wine. I am just not your market.
A lot less tannin than most of the orange wines that are being made down here.
I guess I just don't like tannin in my white. I guess that's what it comes down to.
That's one I'll agree with you on that. I don't like tannin in my white either. And that's it.
Well, thankfully, we're moving on to reds, and where tannin can be acceptable in some forms, in limited forms. Now, to me, I think this next one...
Now, this one I love.
Yeah.
This one I'm all over.
This is great.
I could drink that all... it's Gamay. That explains the whole thing.
This is the third Gamay that we made. The first one was made at Riverview out of the Bader Vineyard, which Thomas Batchelor is now working with. But when we were pouring it...
a master of Gamay, he has become.
Thomas?
Yes.
I'm still waiting for him to start doing some carbonic maceration.
Yeah.
Thomas is the master of a lot of things, but there's only one Yoda of Gamay in Niagara, and I think that's Shiraz Maudillard.
It's funny that we keep saying that, but it's Shiraz is the house that Gamay built, or whatever. The house that Shiraz built is on Gamay, which is I was thinking of the other day.
Yeah, and so the 2019 Gamay was made at Malivoire. We sort of at the time.
There we go.
When I started talking with them, it was I've already got the 18 in the can, so how do we distinguish it? So let's make it a reserve if it's going to be potentially for sale at the same time. So at the time, Facebook was still Facebook, and my reserve designation was Meta. Right there. Then Facebook changed their name, and we're going to phase that.
I guess you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, it's they ruin all the fun.
But that's a lovely one. Is it still available?
This one is, yes, and super small batch. We did 50 cases total. There's a little bit left.
Lovely.
This was Openlander Vineyard, so who is now labeling.
Yeah.
80% of this wine is that, and 20% was Merfoxcroft.
With 20% whole cluster, and was that 20%? Carbonically macerated.
There are actually two batches of it. One was a semi-carbonic, and one was carbonic.
And made where again?
Sorry?
Made where?
Oh, this was done at Malivoire.
Malivoire. Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
I
thought I heard 19 was made at Malivoire, and then
19 and 20.
Okay, 20.
Yep.
No, we willed this wine into existence.
This is a delicious. I finished the glass. That was absolutely delicious.
Have another.
All right, I'll have another splash before.
And while you're pouring that for Michael, I'll have the next wine. Yeah, this is really well done, and this is one where when we talk about, I guess the type of farming, I think this is where you're talking about what the restaurants that you're dealing with are interested in, the questions that they're asking. I know the Oppenlander girls, they're women, but I'm going to refer to them the girls in a positive light. Have started the labeling brand and are working really hard kind of bit by bit to try to reclaim the conventional farming as not being something to be looked down on and being a little bit more transparent. So I think wine like this is quite important to help show that you can make top class wines that are not what you mentioned earlier, boring and conventional, just because the farming is done with a tractor instead of by a hippie behind a horse.
I also love that the Gamay was chilled. That you had that not stone cold, but had a nice chill on it, which I think a good Gamay should have. Just half an hour in the fridge 45 minutes in the fridge, and it just brings that fruit right up. It's just like I'm clapping here right now. I just think it's
clap.
I like really. It's just congratulations. That's a lovely wine.
Wait till you taste this next one.
So,
I'm really into this next one.
So what do you get on this, Andre?
Ooh, the nose is deep. Like the nose is earthy and floral. It's like plum, but the skin part of the plum, like dark plum,
little wild raspberry or wild strawberry, somewhere in that range.
I don't find it. Oh, I don't find it bright enough to be like raspberry.
No, just
strawberry.
wild.
It's like,
something a little bit, not funky, but there's.
Yeah, but it's not quite like black currants, right? Like it's not quite there, but like it's like almost there. It's like if a wild blueberry and a black currant had a beautiful, mildly funky baby.
So,
and then,
see, this is the kind of content that people want. Right
see,
there.
this is earthy on the palate as well.
But blue. It's blue fruit.
Yeah. If you had told me this is maybe a Pinot Noir blend of something, I would believe you.
I'm guessing this is Cab Franc Syrah.
Sort of, but not quite. It's
oh, okay.
So
I'm taking that one.
Yeah. So this is a blend called Dialectic, and this is a almost 50-50 blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot.
Oh, I wasn't even close. I'm even more annoyed because I actually have some of this in my cellar now that I know what it is because I bought it from you at your last pop-up in Hamilton.
Yeah. This is this was made at Organized Crime Winery. So Greg Yemen, the winemaker, and it's just over 13% alcohol. It's maybe not as like conventional cab-ish, but it kind of does the job of being your sort of bigger, quote unquote, bigger wine for Ontario. Yeah. I've poured this for people who were looking for something that fits the cab profile, but they have and this is the thing I hear a lot of is, if it's Ontario, I can't list it as a cab sauv on my list, because there's that expectation that if you're a guest and you're buying a Cabernet Sauvignon, you're getting something from California or Maremma.
Fruit. There's no big fruit on this thing. It's
Greg Yemen is definitely one of the most underrated winemakers in the province.
Doing a great job at
Organized Crime. Here's the thing: is the wines have always been like really good at Organized Crime. It's just because they're kind of tucked in behind, around the corner. Yeah. That I never think about stopping by there. And I know I'm doing a mea culpa right now, but Organized Crime is a winery I need to visit more often.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
This is a good find for you.
Yeah. I've been there's years and years ago back at Vin Italy, Ross Wise and Greg Yemen were up there for the show. I was there too, and so we ended up meeting up in the hills in Valpolicella, and it was a night you can't really you don't want to relive for some reasons, and you don't want to keep talking about it forever. But we're on a timeline here now.
I like those nights I can't remember with the friends I can't forget.
Well, I'll give you one more, and then you can tell me. Let's have a conversation about this first before I put it in. I had a tasting group a long time ago, and we would.
How long ago? Are they all dead?
Oh yeah.
The way you're talking about this is it's like mystery theater.
Years ago, and we had a hard time with Cabernet Franc. And the reason we did was there was always something that people didn't like about it, whether it was either it was too oaky or not oaky enough. It was too pyrazinic, not pyrazinic enough. Too fruity, not fruity enough. And it seemed like
every time splashing wine everywhere, Michael.
Was that me?
Yeah, that was you. You're shaking. You're swirling. You're swirling away.
I was just listening and so
intently.
To
interrupt your stream of thought, your stream of thought there. But
one of the things I find about Cab Franc, and especially in this guy. Oh yeah, sure, of course. One of the tricky parts of identifying how to make Cab Franc, I think, is figuring out the style that works for us here. And there's so many different ways to slice it, right? And so when you are looking for Cab Franc out of Ontario, what is it that you're identifying to find for as hey, this is great Ontario Cab Franc, or this is great Cab Franc? What are you yourselves looking for personally?
Do you want to go first? I know what you're going to say.
I'm not looking for the pyrazines. I know a lot of people are looking for the green pepper, but I do not like that. I like the tobacco. I like the raspberry. I like them to be more ripe. Having been to the Loire Valley, I was less impressed with Chinon because I found them like I would say almost 85% of them were full of that green peppery pyrrhizinic notes. Whereas you went to Saumur or you went to Bourgogne, and they were all lovely fresh fruit, and that's kind of what I'm looking for in Cabernet Franc.
I don't think Ontario's defined its style with Cabernet Franc yet, and I think we have a little bit of the remnants of people trying to be Bordeaux, and I think the people in Ontario either consciously or subliminally are trying to make the next Cheval Blanc, and I don't think that's the solution either. And I think for what Michael said, I don't think having green pepper juice is the way to go, but I think there is a way to harness those pyrazines. And okay, I don't think you enjoyed what was in the glass right now.
I can tell this is Cabernet Franc. It's definitely got the pyrazines. It's got that bell pepper. I get it. There are people who like that, and
I didn't find this particularly bell peppery.
See, I did, but I understand. Having worked for Southbrook many years ago, we had a 2002 on the shelf that was so easy to sell. It's because back then, and this is 2004, 2005, let's say, the 2002 is still on the shelf, believe it or not, and you'd pour it for people. And they're always like, oh, I can't get anything out of wine. I don't understand wine, blah, blah, blah. And you pour it for them and you go, smell this. It's pure green pepper. And they'd be going, yes. And they'd buy a bottle because they could identify something in that glass. And that's why it's the same thing with Chardonnay. And that's why Chardonnay in the U.S. got very popular. It's because people could recognize oak, vanilla, butter. And that became very popular.
Well, and also those are
time.
things that are delicious and people want to put in their mouth.
I'm just saying.
So I guess the question is, if we're making Ontario Cab Franc, great Ontario Cab Franc, and it's not Cheval Blanc style, do we go, if we're looking for comparisons in other regional styles, are we closer to Loire? If we are,
yes, we are.
And so, if
without a doubt we are,
yeah,
but especially 8 years out of 10.
But on the other hand, there's a lot of different styles in the Loire Valley. So now
this is why you just name dropped Bourgogne.
Yes.
And the thing is, like last week, I had a great bottle of high-end Breton with Guillaume, and this wine takes me immediately to Bourgogne. Like for me, this is Bourgogne. It's violet. It's got some of that raspberry scent, and it's got a little bit. I wouldn't even say bell peppery. It's more like,
to me, it's
like
tobacco.
Go to my herb gardening and cut out some savory or some like a bouquet garni. Like it's something like that more than it is bell pepper on this.
Yeah, to me, I find like Cab Franc on that ripening scale, like it goes from bell pepper just into this area of tobacco, and I'm not going to say that I'm a Cab Franc whisperer at all. I don't think that I have the solution because I still am trying to wrap my head around what we should be doing as a style if we're looking for...
Well, how's the market responding to this? You're selling it.
I sell it to people who love this kind of wine, this sort of earthy, savory dimension, but it's this is one of the more premium wines in the ballpark. So this was made at Pearl Morissette, and so I find... And this is a combination of their Redfoot vineyard that they've been leasing and Grimsby Hillside. It used to be Il Vigneto at the time, and then they renamed to Grimsby Hillside. So this was co-fermented in a demi-muid. And but to sell a slightly more premium Ontario Cab Franc to a restaurant really depends on the location because you're going to, again, how do you rotate it? Is it by the glass? Is it by the bottle? And how is it used? So...
And I'm also noticing just in the bottle, it's a 2019.
Yeah.
Which is kind of it's a weak vintage for
reds.
the most part for reds.
But this one I was really surprised by how the kind of concentration we got out of it. So yeah.
Well then, is this it?
Is that it?
That's it for now. We've kind of circle the wagon on what I've got in front of me right here at the moment.
Got
I brought a few things out just to kind of have some fun with, just to try. But
Well, what's next for Fourth Wall Wines? Are you going to conquer the world?
well, I mean, we'll as long as we get home.
Those who are destined to die. What is that show that's now on Prime? No, nobody knows it yet. Those who are meant to die. It's about gladiators conquering the gladiator. Anyway, okay.
All right, Michael.
See, that's a reference that is like right now, and now you look at me like I'm strange.
See, when we have kids,
Those who are about to die. That's what it's called.
Is it good?
Oh, I haven't watched it yet.
Are you going to become a wine gladiator?
That's
is
what I'm
Michael's
getting at.
asking you?
Is he conquering the world? That's what he's getting at.
I hadn't thought of going in that direction, but now that you mention it,
See?
it may not be the worst idea.
You can strap on a sword and a Mark Delahunty costume, and
Oh my God, Michael!
I can't be current, and I got to go back. Obviously,
No,
'cause
that is a pretty good reference, Mark Delahunty. Oh my gosh, Joel, where can people find you and find your wines?
Well, we're all over Toronto and lots of restaurants throughout Hamilton, Niagara. If you go to Instagram, the handle Fourth Wall Wines, you can link to the website from there, which is fourthwallwines.com, and we can do shipping as long as it's done through the wineries themselves. So we don't have a shop, don't have a storefront, don't have any of those kind of fun things, so no pop-ups really in the immediate future. But if you give it a little follow on Instagram, that's always the best way. I'm happy to reach out directly that way. So yeah.
I'm Andre Peru of AndreWineReview.ca.
And I'm Michael Pincus of MichaelPincusWineReview.com. A big shout out right now before we disappear to Los Areño. You had brought up tequila earlier in the show. I thought maybe we'd throw it out there, but no. I think we'll do it right now. Los Areño is sponsoring the podcast for the summer. I know Andre has done his fair share of Los Areño tasting. I've done a steak and tequila night. Andre, have you done anything with the tequila, or have you just...
I'm on my third bottle. And they're not giving it, they're sponsoring us, but I'm paying for them.
So it's tapped into his veins, basically, is what he's saying.
All right, take us away.
Thank you very much to Los Areño, and you can find Andre on his social media channels, me on mine. Thank you very much, Joel. We appreciate it. You're going to join us for a Stump the Chump?
Sounds like it.
All right, perfect. Good night.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to Two Guys Talking Wine on iTunes.
Two Guys Talking Wine is produced by Jim Ray, Adam Duran, and Ken Little.